So this speech is 3 years old. No, I'm just kidding. It's real. What I want to talk about today is that I think the World Wide Web started out with great promise, and I've been in the tech industry for a long time, and I started in the tech industry before the World Wide Web even existed, so I saw the whole curve, and it started out with great potential, being something very, very exciting that we were all really looking forward to as a way to communicate with anybody and to publish things and to find out things. And it started to do that, and it worked for a while, and it had its peak, I think, in about 2005, and it's all been downhill since there. And what I mean by downhill, if you look at the World Wide Web today, and I'm specifically talking about the web, it's entirely covered in advertising. And underneath the advertising, the content that is there is selling something. It's usually selling some kind of agenda. A lot of stuff has moved out of the free and open web, where it can be found by search engines and where it can be published freely, onto social networks like Facebook and Twitter, where it may be censored. Everything today is on TikTok, where you can just obey Chinese rules. It's not out on the open web. And everything that's in the closed web on the social networks is formulated according to some kind of algorithm, and it's shown to people according to an algorithm. And the algorithm serves the people who are paying, which are corporations that are selling things, and not the human beings that are supposed to be using it. So the web is not serving the needs of humans very, very rarely. And that's what I'm going to be talking about, and I'm going to propose a theory that computer programmers might understand for what we have to do to fix it. So I started out as a developer, and that's what I was really best at. In the year 2000, I started a company called Fog Creek Software. Has anybody ever heard of Fog Creek? Is that even okay, small number, thank you. That was, eventually, when I describe it in the past, it was really an incubator. And some of the companies that came out of Fog Creek were Trello, which is still around and was sold to Atlassian, Glitch, which is still around and was sold to Fastly, and Stack Overflow, which was still around and was sold. And you've heard of Stack Overflow. So these are the companies that I started. Over time, by the way, there were also like 10 that did not work. So let's not talk about those. Over time, I had to do more and more management, less and less programming. I spent 10 years as the CEO of Stack Overflow. I'm really happy that I'm not doing that anymore. The people that replaced me in all of these jobs were much better at it as CEOs. So that's good. What I want to talk about is something that every programmer has probably heard, is the idea of an abstraction. And an abstraction is just when you take a group of simple things and you hide the way that they work, the mechanism, and you have an even simpler description of how that whole mechanism works. So for programming, the simplest abstraction is a subroutine or a library or some kind of a framework. Those are sort of bigger and bigger versions of it. And now that we have the internet, when you have one of these abstractions like a framework or a library, it could even have a data center with servers running code as a part of your abstraction. Those are abstractions. And an example of an abstractions are how things have gotten better and better and more powerful for us, easier and easier for us on the web as programmers, and why it's so easy now to do things that was hard. When I started Fog Creek Software in the year 2000, we put our first web server online because you needed a web server to be a company. And I ordered a box from Dell Computer, and I waited 2 weeks, and the box arrived, and I took it downtown where I had rented some space on a shelf where I could plug it in and have it connected to the internet. And then I installed an operating system. I don't know if you remember those, and got that working. And then every once in a while, I would have to go downtown to reboot it because something would be wrong, or I'd have to install the latest disks that I got with a new version of Windows NT. Anyway, that was how you put a server on the internet. And today, obviously, the way you put a server on an internet is you go to some kind of website and you go boop, 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 and you click some 4 links, and now you have a server on the internet, and you're paying $1.30. And it's easy and fun and no problem. And that's if you want a whole server, but chances are almost anything you're building today, you may not even need a server. You may need a place to store some files, or a place to serve some static files for a website, or a place to run some Lambda functions in the cloud, or any of those kinds of things. You don't need servers for any of that stuff. And so it's even easier. And that's because of these abstractions that we've been building. So that's what I mean by abstractions. Now, I want to distinguish between the developer abstractions, which is for us, programmers, and user abstractions for regular I don't know what the word is, civilians, regular people. Now, when the web showed up in 1994, what did we have? We had HTML, and HTML had very, very simple abstractions, but they were things like, I can put a paragraph, and I can make it appear, and people can read the paragraph, or I could put an image if I use an image tag. And that's kind of all we got, and that's where everybody started. We all sort of started ground zero. You can just define a page in terms of paragraphs and images, and we didn't even have CSS originally. And so that's sort of that was the building block that we got as developers and users. Now the developers jumped in and started building all kinds of abstractions for themselves to use, and now 20 years later, we have these ridiculously great abstractions as developers, and they are free, more or less. Now remember, free has two meanings. Free as in I didn't have to pay for it, or maybe I didn't pay very much, but also free as in liberty. I am free to use it any way I want to. Nobody's going to censor me. If I use this particular library or if I pay Amazon for AWS, they're not going to tell me what kind of server I can run or not, and I don't have to obey, for example, Chinese censorship rules. So that's what we built for developers, is these abstractions that were free, and sort of I just picked two right now. There's 5 billion abstractions, but one example might be React components. So the biggest framework right now is React, and there are 1 million components you can get, and there are, I think, about 60,000 that I could find that you can just download from GitHub, and they're React components that do pretty extravagant things that are much better than paragraphs and images. Like I want to show a whole calendar, or I want to show a map. Similarly, then, sort of on the technical side, we have things like Kubernetes that creates this ridiculously beautiful abstraction over a data center. So whereas there used to be people that would build data centers and configure things and do this thing called system administration, we now have an abstraction for all of that, and Kubernetes is an example of that. Both of these things are free as in open source, but especially free as in liberty. Nobody tells you what to do and what not to do when you use them. Now, the users also got abstractions. Now, what is a user abstraction? It's a thing that makes it so that the things that they want to publish and that they want to broadcast on the World Wide Web can be done more easily. And I've picked 3 examples here, but there are also 1 million things that people might want to publish. One is an event. I'm going to have a party. I'm going to have a conference. I've hired a DJ and I got a restaurant. That's an event. And what is an event? When you think of it as an abstraction, it's more than just, a paragraph to describe it. You want to tell what time it's happening, the location that it's happening, a description of the thing, what should I bring, what time zone, directions, etc. So that's an event. And the abstractions here, you can think of them almost as data structures, but they have a presentation that makes sense to human beings. And you want them to have an editor so that an editor can adjust the location using a map rather than having to type words. Another good example is a resume or a CV. It's the history of where you worked. You want to publish this on the web because you want to find better jobs and you want employers to be able to find out about you, but also you want people to be able to find you if they need to ask you a question and they're trying to find the person at Google that works on spell checker. You want to be found for that. And maybe you just want to broadcast some opinions or tell the story of your life, and maybe you want to broadcast this to everybody, and maybe you just want it for your friends, and so I'm going to call that a blog post. So these are 3 examples of abstractions that users might want, and we gave it to them, but we charged them for it. And now it turns out that they weren't willing to pay, and so we charged them for it by originally maybe showing them some advertisements, but actually by flipping the equation and finding somebody that would pay for those things. So the events, the best place to put an event, I think, is Facebook right now, but that lives within Facebook, and Facebook is not necessarily the right place to do it. You could pay for Eventbrite, but nobody will find out about your event unless you tell it about them. All the resumes are on LinkedIn, pretty much 100%, and the blog posts have essentially moved to things like Twitter or Facebook. They've moved, or TikTok if it's video. They've moved to other places, again, within sort of walled gardens. So that's what I'm going to call the commodified zone. Commodification, mischariut, the idea, it's just a place where things are being bought and sold. I'll go into more about that. But let's think about, we didn't give them a choice, really. There is no open source, make a resume and put it on the web. And there probably is, but it's terrible, and nobody will find it. And in the commodified zone, in this area of mischariut, that the web is going to be shitty because buying and selling is taking place. Now, what happens here is that suddenly there's a conflict of interest, which the developers never had. On the user side, when a user wants to get a bunch of people to come to their party, their goal is to get their people, their friends, to find out that the party is existing and to actually come. If you talk about your party on a platform like Facebook, you hit the Facebook algorithm, and the algorithm decides who to show your party to, and they will only show it to people that A, use Facebook, aren't angry about it right now, and B, it's only if Facebook doesn't have a better advertisement to show that person right now, or maybe not an advertisement, but maybe something which will make the people really angry and cause them to type words about the Ukraine and get angry on the internet and somebody. So what Facebook wants is essentially advertising, which means that what they're trying to create is probably some kind of indignation or anger. They don't care who goes to your party. Again, if you want to publish your resume on the internet, it's because you want to find a great job, maybe. That's your goal right now. And so you want to be searchable and findable based on the skills that you have by a potential employer who needs those particular skills. But LinkedIn, that's not how LinkedIn works. The way LinkedIn works is that employers pay LinkedIn, and therefore the people who pay the most money to LinkedIn will see the most and the best potential employees. And so if you put your resume on LinkedIn, actually, you're being shown to the richest companies and the companies that pay LinkedIn, owned by Microsoft, the most money, not by the company that might be the best fit for you or the place where you might want to work or enjoy working. And again, similarly with a blog post, you just want to publish things and you want some freedom there. The owners, the places where you are publishing these things, as I said, they want righteous indignation. They want people to get angry so that they click more and they do things that make the algorithm happy. And they may also have a whole censorship agenda, which I won't even go into. So all I want to show here is that if you're in the commodified zone, which is most of the world, by the way, there is usually a conflict of interest between what the humans want and what the companies actually want. And that means, in fact, I will go a little bit further and I will say commodified spaces, a place where human beings meet, where buying and selling is taking place, is always going to be shitty. It's going to be a little bit less good, probably really a lot less good. And there's a very specific reason that this happens. Now, this all sounds very kibbutznik and communist and stuff like that. So let me take it back a little bit, because I don't want to object to marketplaces. I think marketplaces are great. That's how we have prosperity. There's nothing wrong with capitalism and buying and selling. That all sort of happens. The trouble is when that's the only thing that happens, and that happens everywhere. And so the idea is to try to create, I wonder what my next slide is. Oh, that's a good one. The idea is to try to create spaces where human activity can take place by pushing out the commodified zone, even if it's only temporary. So this room, by the way, is decommodified. No, we paid to get in here. Somebody did. Somebody paid for us to be here. But nobody's buying and selling anything. We're just sharing ideas. If you turn to the person to the left of you, to the right of you to have a conversation, you don't have to be afraid that that person will immediately start trying to buy or sell you something. And that's because we've temporarily created a decommodified zone. Decommodification is anmischariut, pushing out for a moment the tendency of commodified zones to take over every single thing that exists. Let me give you some examples. The problem with commodified zones, by the way, again, I don't mind the buying and selling. The trouble is that displaces, it crowds out human connections, which is what we want. What's an example? If you go to a coffee shop in the morning and you order coffee, they give you the coffee, and then the next thing that happens is that you pay them. And in fact, what you're paying for is the right to not talk to the person that gave you the coffee. What does that mean? If you go to your friend's house and your friend gives you coffee, you have to talk to them. You have to have a conversation. You owe them something. If somebody gives you coffee as a gift, you have to say thank you. And then you have to have a little conversation about, well, that was really nice of you to give me coffee. Why did you do that? So if you go to a coffee shop, and even if you pay, if you try to talk to the barista about their weekend and their vacation, you try to make friends, they're being paid to not have to have a conversation with you. That's not their job. They don't want to talk to you about it right now. And the whole setup is such that they have to make 20 coffees per hour. And so they got to move on to the next person. They don't have time to talk to you about their vacation. That's not the setup in a space where capitalism has decided this is how we're going to do it. And so that's sort of an example of the crowding out where the forces of buying and selling sort of push things out. I'll tell another example, which is really sort of a sad thing that happened with blogs. And you've probably all heard the term blog, although it's really from the past right now. If you look closely, you'll see that they barely exist anymore. A little bit with programmers, but almost no. Used to be this sort of amazing thing where you could have a personal voice. You could write about what you wanted to write about. You could share things. I started writing a blog in 1999. I would write about whatever I knew. I would write about like, hey, here's some things I know about how to create good user interfaces for Windows 95. Here's some things that I know about how to make a software schedule. Here's some things that I know about how to rent an office in New York City. And I would write blog posts about those things. And at some point, I don't know if you remember before Google, but the search engines were all terrible and they couldn't find anything. And Google figured out somehow that there were a lot of bloggers writing things, and those were just human beings, and they did not have any commercial agenda. They were not trying to buy or sell things. And so when they wrote things, they were kind of trustworthy. And Google came up with this algorithm, and they called it PageRank, and it was based on backlinks and stuff like that. But in reality, what the Google algorithm was secretly doing is it was prioritizing blogs. They were essentially saying, the blogs, that's the good content. And if I put something on my blog, for whatever the topic was, renting an office in New York City, boom, it would go to #1 in Google for a long time. And that was pretty good. And that lasted for a few years. And then HubSpot, well, no, I'm not going to name names, but some marketers, people trying to sell things on the internet, said, hey, we don't want to pay for advertisements on Google. We need to be found when people are searching for, I'm looking for a techno club in Rome, Italy. We got to get our club found. It's not a techno club. It's a restaurant. It's a traditional Italian restaurant. It closes at 9 p.m. But we want to show up for anybody who's visiting Rome. And so they would write 8,000 crappy blog posts. And they had software, HubSpot, that would generate those blog posts or make sure that they were putting up 20 a day. And eventually they flooded the zone. They flooded the entire world and the entire web with bad blog posts. And at some point, it would be funny because suddenly you would go to a website and it would literally have 3 million pages about how to find a techno club in Rome, how to find a techno club in Brussels, how to find a techno club in New York City, and actually a bunch of cities that don't even exist, but just from some database. And they would publish all of those things. And they were essentially crapped out the whole Google algorithm through what used to be called SEO, still called that. And eventually Google said this cannot continue, and so they had to deprioritize the blogs, and they basically shut down that whole thing. And at that point, the Google advertising business was so successful that you could just pay Google, and boom, so it's gone. Now, what has happened here is that the commercial activity crowded out the human activity. I could only write, I was a good blogger, I would write 1 blog post a week, and like the local cafe was publishing 30 blog posts a day about garbage to try to spam the search results. I can't keep up. The commercial activity crowded out the human activity. And so that's the reason why decommodification sort of has to be kept at bay. And the web commodified spaces that we have created, which is most of the open web, are usually serving an algorithm, and they're serving corporations rather than humans. So let's go back. The problem here, see what just happened. What happened is the abstraction layer that we created for human beings to use for their resumes and to publish events to their friends and their blog posts and anything else a human wanted to do human things on the internet was forced to be in commodified space, in some space where there was advertising and somebody was buying and selling, and there was an algorithm deciding what to show to whom. Those commodified spaces were there, and they push out human beings. And so this is essentially how we ruin the web. That's my theory. And we ruined it for humans, and it works great for people that just want to sell things, I guess. But that only really works when you're trying to sell a very particular thing. So how do we fix this? Why am I here? And why am I speaking, even though I don't even do these talks anymore? But there's a bunch of developers in the room, and I think developers have a chance to fix this. So whenever I have a chance to talk to developers, I want to do it. So I talked about abstractions, and the problem is that abstractions, we're in the commodified space. I think we need to create abstractions for users in a decommodified space. So that's kind of complicated, but what I mean really is I want to do something so that when users go to publish the things that they want to publish, there's a way that they can do it in a free space where they cannot be crowded out by commodification. And essentially what I want to do is make it possible to build websites that have abstractions in them, not just paragraphs and images, that have a higher level of abstraction inside them, so that when I go to publish my own personal website, I want to be able to say, give me a resume, give me an event, give me a map, give me a list of songs, give me a Trello board, give me a schedule. And I want all those things that I can publish myself, and I can do that on my own website in a space that I control and that's not serving the corporate masters, whoever they might be. And the idea that me and my friends have come up with to do this is called the block protocol. And it's called the block protocol. This is the last time I'm going to say this. This has absolutely nothing to do with blockchain. Forget that. I'm never going to talk about crypto. So forget that. It's not that. That's the part of the problem, not the solution, but that's not what I'm talking about today. There's an app called Notion. Has anybody seen Notion? It's really popular now. It's kind of like a wiki. It's being used a lot. In Notion, the first thing you see is type / for command. It's like a web page generator, and when you hit /, it lets you, brings up a menu, boop, of things that you can insert. So you could insert a to-do list, for example, boink, boink, boink. There's the items on my to-do list. You could insert an image, for example, choose an image. That's all I mean by block. To-do list, image, those are two examples of blocks. Notion has about 100 that you can insert. They can be tables, they can be little Kanban boards, they can be graphs, they can be headings, they can be paragraphs. Those are blocks. That's all they mean by blocks. Now, and that's all I'm talking about, actually. It's really kind of simple. That's all there is to it. You might have seen this in WordPress, because WordPress is huge. It's like 43% of the internet or something. There's 60 million WordPress site, and it says the same thing. Type / to choose a block, and when you type that, a little menu item comes up, and they don't have to-do lists, but they do have regular lists. So you can insert a list, and it's just a bullet list, not a to-do list, but that's okay too. And then you want to insert an image, and that's there. It says image. And the user interface here is just a little bit different. But it kind of does the same thing. It's a little bit different in WordPress. This user interface is what blocks are, inserting blocks, which are just blocks, parts of a document. And this particular user interface style, these are the popular places where we found it, but it's kind of showing up everywhere. I think Retool is really popular now, Coda. I'm not going to go pick the ones that I like, but this particular metaphor for how do I let my end users create a web page where they put some structured data is showing up everywhere. But there are some problems. For example, what you see when you hit / in WordPress versus Notion versus Coda versus any of those other applications is different in every single one. It's similar, but different. And the reason is that there's no standard for blocks, and there's no common way to make blocks work, and there's no even library for blocks. So the developers who implement WordPress, Notion, and Coda basically have to do everything from scratch. And if you wanted to go home and make a blogging tool, or make an invitation tool, or make a cool way to print books, or make any kind of tool that stores data, the first thing you would have to do is re-implement this whole thing from scratch with the blocks and how to insert the blocks. And so what is a block by definition? It's just a unit of content. It goes inside some kind of container. It's not necessarily a standalone thing. Maybe it can appear as a page at most, but it's inside some kind of a container. The container can be a document. It can be a database. It could be maybe a Kanban or a Trello board or something. Anything that contains things. The things that it contains are blocks. This is on the web that I'm talking about. It's HTML. I don't really care about like I said, I don't know what happens on TikTok. Blocks can be composed. They can be rearranged freely. You can drag them around. Blocks have types. And by type, I could mean a very simple type, like a paragraph, or an incredibly complicated type, like a project schedule. And each type can be highly structured, and probably should be highly structured. And so when you define a new type, if your type is a book, then it's got things like author, title, ISBN number, and that's structured in a way that it can be machine processed and searched and manipulated by computers as well. You might be able to change the type. You might have a table, and you might want to turn it into a Kanban board, or you might have a Kanban board, or you might want to turn it into a calendar. And that may or may not preserve some of the data. And sometimes the underlying data is the same for a to-do list or a bullet list. And so changing a to-do list into a bullet list is very easy. And these are end user features. So a lot of people come up to me and say, wait, what about web components, or what about React components? And those, yeah, that's this for programmers. I want to do it for end users. And that means that the user of a block has a way to create, edit, and compose those types. You've given them user interface tools, not for programmers, to construct documents out of these high-level types and publish them on the web. And so the problem we have now is that all the block systems that are out there are completely proprietary. They can't be reused. So if somebody at WordPress implements the code for, I don't know, an equation editor so that you can put mathematical equations as a block, that code cannot now be shared with anyone else. The version that they currently have inside of Gutenberg is very, very specific to the PHP server architecture of WordPress and is completely non-reusable. So everybody has to sort of re-implement everything themselves. And so they all have some kind of lightweight Kanban board. These are from 3 different applications. I don't remember where I got these screenshots. These have all been re-implemented by developers over and over and over again. And actually, none of them are as good as Trello because no developer working on a container has time to put all that effort into making every block good. And so the users don't get a lot of options. And I think in the best of these systems, they have 60 or 70 different block types that they can implement, like usually less than 100. By comparison, like I said, there are 60,000 React components that a developer can insert into their React application. And so we need quite a few more than the 60 that we have. And then there's no data interoperability. So the great thing about the web right now, how many times have you ever had some structured data living in one application, you try to move it to another application, it's not coming with you. And so you take a screenshot of a bitmap and you put it, and everybody's just sending each other screenshots of bitmaps of screenshots, JPEGs of bitmaps of screenshots, probably in a zip file that you send somebody, and it's just a screenshot of some application where the data used to be structured. But we don't even have cut and paste between these applications. So getting data to move from one website to another is a crazy proposition, very, very risky. So these are the problems with the clunky blocks that we're manually making today. And all of these problems would be solved if we had a protocol. And a protocol, it's not an API, it's not code, it's not a company, it's not anything. It's just a free thing. And if we all agree to use this protocol, then all the good stuff that humans are doing would suddenly be able to move into the decommodified zone where they can do things freely. And so what would a block protocol say? It would say that the code for a block is separate from the code from the app that hosts the blocks. And instead of talking to each other directly, there's a protocol in the middle that just says, here's how you embed a block, and here's how, if you are a block, you get embedded in those applications. And then you can put blocks into apps. Once they're in apps, there's an idea the app itself is going to be responsible for storing the data. So the app might be a wiki, or the app might be a blog engine, or the app might be a database. And if a block has some data that it needs to persist, which they all do, that data appears to the user to be a part of the block, but the block is not a company and is not a server. And so that data then goes and gets stored by the application. The application is responsible for holding on to that data, giving it back to the block when the block comes back to life. And that's how the block protocol does it. If the user makes a change to the data, it changes in the app data store. Blocks can talk to other blocks as much as it makes sense within a document, but there also have to be some security provisions when you're going across blocks. So that's what the block protocol spec does here. And you can just go read this right now at blockprotocol.org. And again, it's 100% open source and 100% non-proprietary. We're doing it in a company called Hash, but that the block protocol itself is open source and is completely open. And everything that we're building is 100% open source. So you can use it, play with it, remix it, and do better things with it. So if you follow the rules of the block protocol, then when you make a block, it's interchangeable. Any block will work in any app. If you're a container developer, a database developer, anybody that wants to store things, all types of blocks will just sort of magically work and you get them all for free. So you can focus on your container and not on the blocks. We give our users many, many more options. The data is more interoperable. So the idea of, what is a tree diagram is the same no matter what blogging tool that I'm using or no matter what social network I'm using. And the theory of how this fixes the web is a little bit subtle here, but the way it fixes the web is I think we're giving the open web, the free web, sort of like a fighting chance where users suddenly, we give them some option to publish things on their own websites where they control them that have some structure so that we can create, again, maybe a decentralized platform. In my dream world, everybody would get their resumes off of LinkedIn and put them wherever the heck they wanted. And as long as they used the resume block, they would be easily found by employers or by anybody. And other people could make tools that sort of knew how to search those things because those things would all have a single schema. And then users would sort of control their lives again. So what we're doing right now at Hash, hash.ai is the URL for the company. We're building something called a hash editor, and that's just sort of like sample code, also open source, but it's just sort of sample code where you can throw any kind of block you want. And so it's the ultimate container for blocks. We've created a bunch of simple blocks, and we're going out to the community to try to create as many other open source blocks as possible for that platform. But this is a whole ecosystem that, again, will be 100% free and open. We're working on defining the spec of the block protocol, and we're working on one last thing, which is we're going to try to implement block support inside the WordPress editor. So WordPress is 43% of the websites on the world. It's 60 million individual websites. Almost everybody publishes things using WordPress, and if they could put blocks into WordPress, that would be friggin' amazing, because that would really give this kind of a bootstrap for the whole ecosystem. All the stuff's on GitHub. Go to hash.ai and follow the links, or go to blockprotocol.org and follow the links. What we're sort of trying to get help with a little bit, there's the spec, is people to make blocks, and it's sort of very, 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 very early in this process. So if you go out there and look what blocks are available, what blocks have been made, there's a lot of room to get famous by being the person that makes the really cool image editing block, or the map block, or the image editor block, or even proprietary blocks. It's like an open protocol. So if you want to make a block that represents your company's value proposition and charge people to use it, that's all great. That's all fine. If you have some kind of a hosting app, if you're trying to build some kind of internal system or external system or public system that at some point ultimately lets people put content in it, the content that they put in it should be blocks. That will make your life a million times easier, and help us with the protocol, because we've probably made mistakes and we've been working on it. We want it to be a big open process, and make sure that the version 1.0, at least of the protocol, is something that really works for everybody. So this can sort of, the hope is it upgrades the web. We had HTML and then we kind of stopped. I kind of want to upgrade the web to sort of a higher level of web, where instead of the things being in there being, paragraphs and images, let's put more powerful things in there, much, much higher level of abstraction on the web. And that's the block protocol. Thank you very much.